Kia ora koutou, I'm Samah.
And I'm Chris. Tēnā no tātou. Welcome back to another video.
Today we're going to look at an Aotearoa-based study looking at different characteristics of vegans, vegetarians and omnivores.
Uru mai tātou. Let's get into it. Climate change, dwindling fresh water, animal exploitation and other scary stuff are major issues we're all fighting against. Shifting the planet towards a plant-based lifestyle is being championed as a way to fight these existential threats. But in Aotearoa, based on this study, sadly less than 6% of us identify as vegetarian or vegan.
If shifting our diet is so important, then what's stopping people? Well, scientists have been on a quest to answer this very question, and now we have our very own analysis from the University of Waikato, called To Meat or Not to Meat, a longitudinal investigation of transitioning to and from plant-based diets.
The authors looked at a range of characteristics they thought may be associated with diet. Most of the results were to be expected, but a few of them surprised us. So, let's get straight into it.
First, based on the study's 45,000 participants, they found that 94.1% of them were omnivores, 4.6% vegetarian, and only 1.2% were vegan. The participants were asked how much they agreed with a series of statements and questions on a scale from 1 to 7. Using this data, the authors analysed which characteristics are more strongly associated with each diet, and if they play a role in transitioning between diets over a one-year period.
To figure out the participants' political views, first they asked them how liberal versus conservative they see themselves as being. Next, they looked at right-wing authoritarianism, which included the statement, "It is always better to trust the judgment of the proper authorities in government and religion than to listen to the noisy rabble-rousers in our society who are trying to create doubt in people's minds."
And they looked at people's social dominance orientation, which the internet tells us is a measure of an individual's support for group-based hierarchies. They asked them whether it was okay if some groups had more of a chance in life than others, and whether we should have increased social equality.
The results for this were pretty much as you'd expect. Vegans were the most liberal, they had less faith in government and religious institutions, and were the strongest believers in social equality. On the other hand, those who scored highly in right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation were more likely to be omnivores. As the writers say, this is in line with previous research which has consistently found flesh eating to be associated with a preference for hierarchical relations, tradition, and convention.
This Belgian study looked at why it is that right-wing adherents are more likely to accept animal exploitation and to consume animals. They found two main psychological processes behind this. First, it was because of the perceived threat animal rights ideologies pose to the dominant ideology. And second, because of the belief in human superiority over animals. People who expressed strong attachments to their country's identity, customs, and economy were more accepting of animal exploitation.
The writers explained that those with more conservative or right-wing values are more likely to hold prejudiced attitudes against deviants and outgroups, for example, immigrants, because they're seen as threatening the dominant culture and ideological system.
In another study looking at evidence of bias towards vegetarians and vegans, they found that vegetarians, and especially vegans, face extremely negative attitudes, equal to or worse than commonly stigmatized groups. They found that over 40% of the vegetarian participants and over half of the vegan participants reported experiencing at least some everyday discrimination. They engaged in activities to prepare for this potential discrimination, and they engaged in discrimination coping mechanisms, such as accepting it as a normal part of life.
Vegetarians and vegans are evaluated negatively for their resistance to norms. And the more you challenge these norms, the more bias you face. So vegans and vegetarians motivated by animal rights were viewed the most negatively, followed by those motivated by the environment and then health.
To summarize all of that, people who are strongly attached to traditions, social norms, and established authorities are more resistant towards change and those who want to bring about that change. And the more comfortable you are with seeing other groups as inferior, the more comfortable you are with dominating and eating other animals.
Next, let's look at gender. As they expected, they found that men were less likely to be vegetarian or vegan, no surprise. As the writers said, men are more likely to have conservative ideologies than women.
In another study about gender differences in attitudes to vegans and vegetarians, they said vegetarian diets are generally considered to be less masculine than meat-based diets, and omnivores exhibit more prejudice against vegetarian men than vegetarian women. They also explored how women are socialized to show greater care for other animals and the environment.
They suggested that men are less likely to do anything which they see as feminine, because they're afraid to lose their masculinity, both in their own eyes and the eyes of others. Women, however, are less concerned with making gender-abiding choices. This is also referred to as precarious masculinity, a concept which describes the instability of masculinity and its constant need for reaffirmation. Besides, the writers said, it seems that men are under more social pressure when it comes to maintaining stereotypical social norms.
One could argue that PETA using the objectification of women's bodies to promote veganism is an effective way of targeting men, by presenting the message in a way that aligns itself with popular masculinity. But if masculine traits lead to the subjugation of animals, wouldn't reinforcing them perpetuate animal suffering? Wouldn't it be better to dismantle the harmful constructs of masculinity altogether and embrace feminine traits such as empathy? As many feminist writers have pointed out, the objectification of women and animals are related and work to reinforce one another.
Interestingly, this study found that vegan men were less conservative than omnivorous and vegetarian women. This means veganism is a higher predictor of liberalism than gender, even when gender is combined with vegetarianism.
They also looked at environmental efficacy, asking participants how much they believed in their own ability to positively impact the environment. Vegetarians scored more than omnivores, but the vegans had by far the highest score. It's clear that vegans are well aware of the environmental benefits of veganism, and this could be especially true for vegans of Aotearoa, given that the impacts of industrial dairy farming is common knowledge.
They also asked participants about the perception of their own health, how often they get sick, and how optimistic they are about the future of their well-being. Once again, vegans reported the highest rates of subjective health, followed by vegetarians. This association wasn't as strong as the previous ones, but we thought we'd mention it anyway.
For religious and spiritual beliefs, they asked people if they believed in some form of spirit or life force. They found that beliefs in religion and spirituality didn't have any associations with diet. The writers reckon it's because New Zealand is largely secular, with a lot of people not identifying with any religion. This is interesting because both the questions about right-wing authoritarianism included religious aspects.
While the first question was about faith in government and religious authorities, the second statement, which was reverse scored, was atheists and others who have rebelled against established religions are no doubt every bit as good and virtuous as those who attend church regularly. Because the people who scored higher on these questions were more likely to be omnivores, it implies there is a connection between religion and flesh eating.
The result could be due to a badly phrased question. Asking people whether they believe in some form of spirit or life force may not accurately reflect people's religious views, as it's possible for people who are not religious in a traditional sense, like myself, to say that they also believe in some form of life force. So we wonder if the question was phrased differently in order to distinguish between spirituality and established religions, if they would have found more of an association.
And the last one we're going to look at today was about protection of native species. For this one, they asked people how much they agree with the statement, protecting New Zealand's native species should be a national priority. This one surprised the writers the most, as they hypothesized it would be a predictor for veganism. And although vegetarians scored slightly higher than omnivores on this, vegans actually scored lower than both vegetarians and omnivores.
The researchers gave two possible explanations for this. They thought maybe it's because the wording native species suggests both animals and plants. Their other suggestion was that protecting New Zealand's native species could be seen as a form of national pride and nationalism in general, rather than a facet of support for animal protection. Nationalism is often associated with conservatism, so we can understand that aspect of the question putting some vegans off.
We'd like to add that native species protection is often associated with killing other animals. And because the statement asked if it should be a national priority, it could be understood within the context of the state-enforced, militarized approach we currently undertake. So maybe that's why vegans weren't so keen on this one. Aotearoa.
In terms of transitioning, only gender and conservatism affected the likelihood of transitioning over time. So, women, liberals, and liberal women were the most likely people to transition towards a vegetarian or vegan diet. There's our target market, folks.
It's interesting they found environmental efficacy was not a transitional factor to becoming vegan or vegetarian. As we know, environmental concern is often a strong motivator for transitioning. Perhaps it's because they asked people how much they believed in their abilities to make a difference, not simply their levels of environmental concern.
This indicates people's belief in themselves grew after transitioning, which really speaks to the empowering nature of veganism and how it's capable of shifting our wider perspectives of the world, far beyond our diets.
Unfortunately, they didn't get any indication of what makes people transition to an omnivorous diet, so sadly, the study doesn't tell us how to keep people vegan.
Nonetheless, the study gave us some really good insights into some of the barriers to transitioning to a vegan or vegetarian diet, once again linking conservatism with flesh eating. Anecdotally, most of us know this to be true, and it's pretty well reflected in our political landscapes.
National and ACT, for example, tend to be more on the conservative end of the spectrum. They're always coming out in defense of animal farmers and celebrating the culture of flesh eating. On the other hand, the Green Party have spoken at 2 animal rights marches in Aotearoa. They've given their support to animal-focused campaigns led by animal rights advocates and are definitely the bravest when it comes to calling out animal agriculture.
Our diets aren't just about the food we eat. They're impacted and impact our perspectives of the world more widely. This study is yet another example of why vegan advocacy shouldn't be apolitical. Fighting for animals means fighting against the ideologies that uphold their oppression.
Animals are stuck within a hierarchical worldview which places some groups above others and naturalizes oppression on the basis of it being traditional or normal. So, we have to fight against the normalization of animal farming in Aotearoa. We can do that by highlighting the colonial construction of these industries and explore the many unnatural processes these systems rely on.
All of this science works against the common accusation of veganism as an expression of privilege or some sort of colonizing force. On the contrary, vegans strongly believe in social and environmental equality and are more comfortable behaving in countercultural and feminine ways. It's time that non-vegan leftists dropped their unscientific views about us and embraced veganism with all its anti-patriarchal and liberalizing beauty.
Ko motu tērā kiriata e hoa mā. We really enjoyed diving into the details of this study, so please let us know what you think. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. If you've been enjoying our videos and you want to support our kaupapa, you can find out more about us on our website, all.org.nz. And if you want to support us, you can find us on kofi.com searching for Aotearoa Liberation League if you'd like to make a donation. Peace out for now. Mā te wā.